Hey, welcome everybody to City Lights on this very lovely day. And for those of you online, hello as well. As always, we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone. It is always a delight when we are celebrating one of the books that City Lights publishes. As many of you know, we're a publishing house as well as a bookstore. Today's event is brought to you in conjunction with Tsuru for Solidarity. The book we are celebrating is titled The Afterlife Is Letting Go. And of course, we are deeply honored to have Brandon Shimoda here, actually in the store for the first time. We've hosted many events for him online, but having him here in person, especially for this particular occasion, is such a wonderful thing. So The Afterlife Is Letting Go is an exquisitely produced series of multi-layered, multi-voiced essays exploring the afterlife of the US government's forced removal and mass incarceration of Japanese immigrants and Japanese Americans during World War II. It is informed by personal and familial history, as well as years of painstaking research. City Lights is honored to be able to publish such a superlative book. Brandon is a 2020 Whiting Fellow. He's the author of numerous books of poetry and prose. These include the wonderful Hydra Medusa, which is out on Nightboat Books, also The Grave on the Wall, which is also another City Lights published book, which received a Pen Open Book Award, and also Evening Oracle, which received a Williams Cornelius Williams Award. He is the co-editor of To Look at the Sea is to Become What One Is, and A Tell Adnan Reader, which is also another Nightboat book. And really, he makes his home in Colorado Springs, but we really feel like, you know, this is also a home for him. And I am so happy that we can see so many family members here tonight. And for those of you online as well, please join us in welcoming Brandon Shimoda.
Thank you, Peter. Everyone, my partner's online. Lisa, you can hear me? What a beautiful crowd. It's true. I do have a lot of family members here, including my daughter, Yumi. Correct. There's two of my students from Colorado Calendar here. 4. Hi. It's great to see everybody. I've read at City Lights many times, but I've never read here in person. So let me gather myself. It's been a while since I've read in person in general. And maybe the last time was in Berkeley. I'm not exactly sure. Hi. Okay. So what am I doing here? I'm going to read a little bit from the book that Peter just mentioned, which I love. And it's not because I wrote it. I just love the book itself. I want to thank Elaine Katzenberger. What? Oh, there's people up there? Well, that's cool. How do you get there? That's cool. I want to be up there. Elaine is my editor, has been my editor for 2 books. And it's true, I'm sure I've said this to you before, but Elaine makes me think harder. And it's not that she's asking me in that way, think harder, but I write in a way to make Elaine proud of the book that she's making. I mean, proud of also my writing, but proud of what she's making. So thank you, Elaine. And then thank you, Stacy, who also is here at City Lights. And Paul Yamazaki, who I just met for the first time today, City Lights, luminaries. And Peter, who introduced me. Thank you, Peter. And all the people who work at City Lights on all sides of things. So I'm gonna read. So Tsuru for Solidarity is the co-sponsor tonight. How many people here are affiliated with Tsuru? If you could just raise your hand. Yeah. Is Casey here? Where? Casey? Oh, Casey Mukai. Where? Hiding? I thought it would be good if somebody from Tsuru just got up very briefly and just said something about the work that you do. Oh, but she's not here. Oh, okay. Well, maybe we can do it afterwards. It might make sense afterwards, depending on which direction the conversation goes. But Tsuru for Solidarity is an extraordinary group, and I feel like, well, we always need to be paying attention to what's going on in our country. And Tsuru, I think, is very attentive to a variety of issues that are always very important, dealing with migrant detention, deportation. They're a social justice, JA-led social justice organization. So hopefully, maybe afterwards, Casey can say a little bit about the work. But there are a lot of people here who do work with Tsuru for Solidarity. I'm going to read a part of the book that maybe is the most straightforward part of the book, because not that is that Casey? Okay, well, we'll get to you afterwards. Afterwards, would you mind saying some things about Tsuru? Okay, great. Not that the book isn't like incredibly abstract. I think it's probably the most straightforward thing that I've written. But there are poetic qualities. My orientation is poetry. That's how I identify poet. But I'm gonna read a part of the book that takes place in San Francisco, and that takes place at a protest at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And several of the people that I'm going to quote and mention in this excerpt are here. And so that makes sense to me. And the chapter starts in San Francisco, so that also makes sense to me. Last thing I want to say before I got started is that the book, I started writing this book in earnest towards the end of 2016. So part of the motivation, there were many things that motivated this, was the 2016 election. I felt like I needed to go back into this history, both familial and communal and ancestral, in order to understand what was going on 2016. Now we're 8 years later, and I feel like everything has changed and nothing has changed. The first presentation I gave for what became this book, and there's a chapter in the book about this, was Inauguration Day 2017. So it's also the resonance. It doesn't feel full circle. It just feels like a very fat line that just keeps going on and on. Okay, everyone's comfortable. Peace Plaza. If anybody has the book, you're welcome to read along. It's page 39. And people at home as well. A woman with a red scarf came up to me in the Peace Plaza in Japantown, San Francisco. I was standing at the entrance to the mall reading a timeline mounted on the wall. Quote, 1948 to 1960. About one half of Japantown is razed for one of the first major federally funded urban renewal projects in the US. Nearly 1,500 Japanese Americans and over 60 businesses are displaced. 3 years after the war, 2 years after the last of the concentration camps, Tule Lake closed, and shortly after returning to the cities and towns from which they had been forcibly removed, the Japanese Americans were once again being displaced. Before the war, there were 43 Japantowns in California alone. 3 remain: Los Angeles, San Jose, San Francisco. It was a cold afternoon in August. I heard a voice. Thank you for reading the timeline. I turned around to see a woman in a red scarf. The way she said thank you made me think that she had written the timeline. had at least been evolved in its making. The most conspicuous feature of the Peace Plaza is the 5-story pagoda. It was designed by Yoshiro Taniguchi and was a gift 20 years after the war from Japan. Of Taniguchi's famous works, most of which are in Tokyo, many of which are in Kanazawa, the pagoda is the only one outside of Japan. It was modeled in form after the Hyakumanto Dharani, miniature pagodas, each containing a Buddhist text that were commissioned by Empress Yoken in the 8th century. On windy days, the pagoda becomes a wind instrument. The Asian American High School Students Alliance had that afternoon set up 3 taiko drums adorned with purple dragons beneath the pagoda, but the students were nowhere to be found. A short distance away, much less conspicuous, is a slender 3-sided bronze sculpture. It stands on the sidewalk on Post Street, like a pedestrian waiting to cross. It was made by Louis Quaintance and Eugene Daub and consists of 3 bas-relief panels, each depicting a scene of Japanese American life. A family, man with cabbage, woman with broom, girl with doll, women dancing at a festival, people being driven out of their communities. The woman with a red scarf was Sansei, maybe 20 years older than me. Her name was Marianne, which she pronounced Marianne. Her grandfather immigrated to the United States through Seattle. He eventually immigrated to Beijing, where he died. Her accent kept changing: Japanese, Chinese, British, Southern. When I told her my name, she said it back to me exaggeratedly, Brandon. And when I told her that I was writing a book about Japanese American incarceration, she shook her head and said, "We're beyond that." Maybe she's here. It just occurred to me. Sorry. What does it mean for people to survive a trauma? And how can anyone be sure that they have survived rather than more simply not died? If people have transformed beyond who and how they were before the threat became real and started moving through them, what can be said to have survived on the other side of that transformation? And what does it mean to celebrate on that far side when everyone in the sky, beneath the ground, or at the bottom of the sea, whose death or disappearance might attest to something different, something not deserving of celebration, is no longer present or has been forced by the people who have hurried themselves into the celebratory beyond to remain in the past? At the bottom of the panel of women dancing is a poem by Janice Mirikitani, one of the first Japanese American poets I read, one of the first for me who existed. She was an infant when her family was incarcerated in Rower in the floodplain of the Mississippi. The poem is called "Footsteps Lead to Destiny." We dance honoring ancestors who claim our home and freedom to pursue our dreams. Our voices carve a path for justice, equal rights for all. We prevail, our future harvested from generations. From my life opens countless lives. The journey continues. Who was Marianne speaking for when she said, "We're beyond that"? Her presence in the Peace Plaza and her thanking me for being there did not suggest that she was beyond at least having an interest in the history of Japantown and playing a role in sharing it. I wished I had the courage or wit or presence of mind or sympathy to ask Marianne if she thought it was possible to move beyond an event that has not ended without abandoning all the individuals still mired within it, and without making peace however uncomfortable with that abandonment. But I did not say anything. I smiled and felt ashamed of myself, of the book that I wanted right then to put down, and for wanting to put the book down. What I meant to say, but it was too late, the red scarf was flying around the corner, was a book about the ongoing afterlife of. On Saturday, June 22nd, 2019, Japanese Americans gathered in front of Bentley Gate on the edge of Fort Sill, an Army base outside Lawton, Oklahoma, to protest the Trump administration's plans to reopen the base as a detention facility to incarcerate approximately 1,600 asylum-seeking children from Central America. The protest was organized by Tsuru for Solidarity, a JA-led social justice organization committed to interrupting state violence, ending migrant detention, closing all detention sites, supporting immigrant and refugee communities. Among the protesters were survivors in their 70s and 80s. Satsuki Ina, who's sitting right over there, co-founder and co-chair of Tsuru, spoke first. Oh, I should just have you read what he said. I am a former child incarceree, she began. We are here today to protest the repetition of history. We were held under indefinite detention. We were without due process of law. We were charged without any evidence of being a threat to national security, that we were an unassimilable race, that we would be a threat to the economy. We hear these exact words today regarding innocent people seeking asylum in this country. Satsuki's parents, Shizuko and Itaru, who, by the way, are a subject of a book that Satsuki wrote, The Poet and the Silk Girl, which is maybe in the store. It's really incredible. They were incarcerated in Tanforan, Topaz, and Tule Lake, where Itaru was held in a maximum security stockade and where he wrote haiku, including this one. Ito tombo, haya umareshika, goku no mado, damsel flies already born at the prison window. Satsuki was born in Tule Lake into the impossible status of being simultaneously a citizen and an enemy of the United States. Her testimony was followed by that of other survivors, each wearing a #StopRepeatingHistory t-shirt and holding an enlarged photo of themselves as a child. I spent my first 4.5 years in a concentration camp, said Kiyoshi Ina, Satsuki's older brother. I'm here to protest the incarceration of immigrant children. On December 7th, 1941, I was celebrating my 4th birthday, said Nikki Nojima Lewis, when the FBI interrupted my party and removed my father to Lordsburg, New Mexico. My mother and I were incarcerated at the Puyallup Fairgrounds called Camp Harmony and later in Minidoka. As if on cue, she was interrupted again, this time by a military police officer demanding that the protest move across the highway. Let's go, he shouted, today. Otherwise, what will happen? Satsuki asked. I don't know, he said, surprisingly. Why didn't he know? The question could not have been simpler. I'm not going to arrest you, he said, but you need to move now. If you're not going to arrest us, we're not going to move, said Mike Ishii, co-founder and co-chair of Tsuru. When I asked Mike about this moment, he told me that behind a stone wall that read, "Welcome to Fort Sill, Oklahoma," there were approximately 30 additional police officers armed and waiting. The survivors were arranged in a line. Beside them stood Duncan Ryuken Williams, Zen Buddhist priest. Behind them, a line of descendants. Ora Newlin, Karen Ishizuka, Nancy Ukai, sitting right over there, Lauren Sumida, Martha Nakagawa, Ruth Sasaki among them. They were holding up a rope from which were hanging many garlands of colorful Tsuru. In front of them were cameras, reporters, local activist groups, including Black Lives Matter Oklahoma City, led by T. Sherry Dickerson. Before the protest, Ishii led a civil disobedience training. He explained to the survivors that there was a chance that they would be arrested. And if that were to happen, there was no guarantee how much or how little they would be protected. The survivors would ask if they wanted to go through with the protest. One by one, each survivor said, yes. I spent 3.5 years at Poston, an American concentration camp, said Chizu Omori, who's sitting right over there. I'm here to bear witness to the travesty of the American justice system. This is me in 1943, said Paul Tomida, holding an enlargement of his indefinite leave card issued on July 4, 1943, permitting him to leave Minidoka. He was 4. The MP, a large man, yet diminishing in stature, interrupted again. It's English, he shouted. Get out. This is all on Democracy Now's website, this video of everything that I'm describing. Paul, wearing a t-shirt with the words "No, no" emblazoned in black between strands of barbed wire, kept talking. Can you please describe what's happening? A reporter asked Satsuki. They're wanting to remove us, she said. We've been removed too many times. For whatever they were feeling individually, together, the survivors projected indomitable confidence and calm. The MP was flustered, losing faith. What, in the face of a group of steadfast elders, speaking solemnly and assuredly from the perspective of people who had already been arrested, who had already been removed too many times, was the MP supposed to do? He had become, despite his station and his weapons, defenseless. His violence came up against our moral authority of nonviolence, Mike Ishii told me. The MP, summoning the last of his weakening will, shouted, "What don't you people understand?" We understand the whole history of this country, Reiko Redmond shouted back, and we aren't going to let it happen again. The Japanese Americans were speaking not only on behalf of themselves, but on behalf of the 707 Issei who were incarcerated at Fort Sill, 1941 to 1942, including many Buddhist and Shinto priests. I first heard of Fort Sill because of my interest in a man named Ichiro Shimoda. A gardener from LA, Shimoda died under mysterious circumstances in Fort Sill. His story, which exists in the historical record in contradictory fragments, is that he witnessed the murder of another Issei, Kane Saburo Oshima, a shopkeeper from Hawaii, who also died in Fort Sill, shot and killed by a guard. According to one account, Shimoda suffered a nervous breakdown as a result and was taken to the military hospital where he died. None of the other prisoners were with him, and nothing else about the incident is known. Shimoda's death with Oshima's murder was folded efficiently into the oblivion on which the carceral system thrives. No guards stood trial or were held accountable. That was not how it began. Approximately 340 Chiricahu'a Apache were incarcerated at Fort Sill between 1894 and 1914. Among them was the Apache leader Geronimo, who was buried there in the Bear Creek Apache Cemetery. Which means, Kathy Kojimoto told me, you must go to the Military Base Visitors Center, fill out paperwork, have valid photo ID, and get a pass to visit Geronimo's grave. That includes the descendants of the tribe. Fort Sill was also the site of a Native American boarding school, opened in 1871, closed in 1980, which separated indigenous children from their families, forcing them into a program of cultural erasure and re-identification. It didn't work, said Lavetta Yekwo, an elder of the Kiowa tribe of Oklahoma, who had gone through the boarding school system. We still have our language, we still have dances, we still have our songs, we're still here. During the Obama administration, approximately 1,200 migrant children from Central America were incarcerated at Fort Sill. The Department of Health and Human Services eventually closed the detention center, citing the exceptional expense of keeping it running. Most of the children the government incarcerated then and was seeking to incarcerate in 2019 crossed the US-Mexico border with family, half of them with parents already in the United States, yet they were classified as unaccompanied. They were held in overcrowded cages, then moved to less visible, more indefinite camps, which are outposts of the border wall, where they were deprived of the basic dignities that might have reminded them that there was, beyond the care they were able to offer each other, a world, and that the world cared. I asked Satsuki how she felt being at Fort Sill. I found my suffocated voice, she said. Though she was not incarcerated there, it was as though her childhood had been dispersed across the geography of incarceration, and that her voice preceding her was waiting. Anger rose to the top of sorrow, she said. On Saturday, March 6th, 2021, another group of Japanese Americans gathered, this time virtually, to speak out about migrant detention. All but one of the participants were teenagers. The oldest of them, the host of the event, was Skyla Sachiko Tomine, age 17, high school student, activist, and Satsuki Ina's granddaughter. The first presenter was Ivan Ramirez, 14, a member of the indigenous Mayan mom from Guatemala, who was calling from a church in Austin, where he and his mother Hilda were living in sanctuary. They fled Guatemala when he was 7, were detained in the Dilley Detention Center, Texas, for almost a year, and had been living in the church for almost 5 years. Ivan showed a video that he made that told his and his mother's story. In it, he described living in a child migrant detention center, La Perera, he called it, the dog kennel. He described the food, the worms in the food, which Ivan illustrated in the video with rainbow-colored gummy worms in a bowl of black beans. Maybe they fell down, the guards said about the worms. From the ceiling? Just eat it, the guards demanded. Children were constantly getting sick, fainting, vomiting. If you got sick, they would not care, Ivan said. When the children were not able to eat, the guards claimed that they refused. Sometimes the children refused. They went on hunger strike. The guards were constantly screaming at them, holding guns to them if they misbehaved or spoke out. Sometimes the children spoke out. They protested, shouted, "Libéranos." When I came here, I was 9, Ivan said of the church, and now I'm 14. I don't know when I'm going to have a normal life and when I'm going to get free. Skyla asked Ivan what people could do to help him and his mother. Tell Biden to stop our deportation, stop the detention centers, stop deporting people, he said. Ivan was followed by Mina Loy Akira Chisel, 13, an aspiring filmmaker and the granddaughter of Karen Ishizuka, activist, writer, chief curator at the Japanese American National Museum, and Robert Nakamura, filmmaker. Chisel showed a video she made for a school project on family separation, including its connection to Japanese American incarceration. There are about 69,550 children who have been separated miles away from their parents, whom the US government is failing to reunite, she said. They are living in harsh conditions, no way to take baths and barely enough food. They are in prison. As Chesel's film was playing, I could see Ivan in his zoom rectangle on the far edge of the screen, looking apprehensively out the window. Then he turned his camera off. At the end of the event, when he and his mother turned their camera back on, Hilda was visibly shaken. Holding back tears, she explained in Spanish what had happened. The writer, Aida Salazar, translated. Ivan and Hilda had to turn off the camera because there was a man who was threatening them, who was trying to burn down the church. He's angry at their existence. That just happened right now. As I think about the people like Ivan and Hilda who are attempting to fashion a future in the face of desperate odds and the anger of strangers who want to burn their sanctuaries to ash. As I think about people like Tomine and Giselle, descendants of incarceration, who exist in a certain way in the realization of a version of that future, and are creating of that realization other forms of sanctuary, stories, for example, and the opportunity to tell them. As I think about the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who have been developing and sharpening their awareness of the connections between crimes against being human, and who have been upholding through demonstrations and acts of solidarity the energy that has been passed down to them. As I think about the Japanese American elders protesting at sites of exception, Fort Sill, ICE headquarters in San Francisco, the ICE detention center at the Yuba County Jail in Marysville, Cook County Jail in Chicago, the Greensboro Piedmont Academy in North Carolina, the Berks County Detention Center in Pennsylvania, the Carrizo Springs, Dilley, and Fort Bliss Migrant Detention Centers in Texas, the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma, and so on and ongoing. As I think about the people who have been thinking about and standing in solidarity with and taking direct action to support the people who are living and dying today and tonight under the watch and the weight of their oppressors. And as I think about the people who are not thinking about those people because they do not have the knowledge or time, or because they do not want to, or because they refuse to, or because they do not believe in the struggle, or because they condone or endorse in one form or another the oppression, or because they have not yet reached the imperative opening at the end of their own storytelling. I am led to believe that Japanese American incarceration, as one example in an unremitting, insatiable Anthropocene of exception, has not ended, but has entered a new phase. Goku no Mado, Haya Umareshika, Ito Tombo, at the prison window, already born damselflies. And then I'm going to end with this. This was the very beginning of the talk I gave on Inauguration Day 2017. This was at the Holocaust History Center in Tucson, Arizona. One way to make sense of Inauguration Day, I began, is to acknowledge the word within the word, augur, to foretell events by interpreting omens. Some say augur comes from the Latin for bird, and that the definition comes from the foretelling events by interpreting the entrails of dead birds. More specifically, the entrails of birds that have been sacrificed. Inauguration Day, therefore, is a day to see, through the entrails harvested by sacrifice, what is to come. All the entrails reconstituting what has been, much of which has not yet been digested. Thank you.
So Brandon is happy to take questions or comments. And if you would please wait until I get to you, that would be great, because then the people online can actually hear the question.
I should say that I imagine there's also people in the audience, or I hope there's people in the audience who might be also willing to answer questions. So much of my book is about the community and about people who gave so generously to me, shared with me their stories, and who continue to share with me their stories and their experience. So maybe what could be more useful than me just continuing to talk is if people had questions for people in the audience. No pressure.
Yeah, let me bring this to you.
So your book takes a number of forms, from engaging with fiction, poetry, archival materials, existing oral histories, to creating new oral histories, to including your own engagement with the material and your poetry. And it all kind of wonderfully comes together. So, and as you mentioned, you've been working on it since 2016. I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about that process of getting all these forms to coalesce into a book.
By the way, this is a writer. This person. Would you please introduce yourself?
My name is Mauro Javier Cárdenas. I live here in San Francisco, and my latest book is American Abductions, which has, even though I had not read his book when I wrote that book, there's a lot of synergies between our books.
Yeah.
I feel like.
Yeah. I know that you were reading my book because you tweeted about it. And so then I immediately bought his book, American Abductions. And it's incredible. It's now a book that I'll read a chapter just to get myself into the spirit of writing, because the energy of it is so infectious. So thank you. What was your question? That was my answer to your question. What was the process? I said this recently, and maybe I'm just now repeating myself, but maybe I'll explain the realization I had at the very end of the process, which is that the process of putting this book together felt like herding cats through a doorway. And by that, I mean, much of it didn't make any sense and was very chaotic and was stressful and sort of like slapstick until the very end, when I finally got the last cat through the doorway. And I think by that, and because you're a writer, you probably know this very well, a lot of it is chaos. I think I went through many cycles of what I envisioned the book to be. And most of those I could only really express to myself as a feeling. I was having a difficult time translating it into a particular form. And so part of me, a book is the record of indecision. It's realizing that I don't have to decide between different forms. It's really about finding a way to accommodate my refusal to decide into something cohesive. And to me, that's what a book is. But a more straightforward answer is I don't remember. I don't actually remember. Do you? I mean, do you? Do you remember?
It all feels made up as an answer in retrospect, right? Like to say, like, okay, this is maybe how it happened. So it's similar, yes.
Anyone else?
Can I ask a question?
Someone over here? No. Ah,
Well, I want to thank City Lights for publishing this book. because Brandon, it's wonderful and the timing is so important. And City Lights, thank you. Thank you for writing it, of course, but if nobody published it, it would not be with us, and we're grateful.
The timing is always relevant. Timing is always terrible. Can I ask? Oh,
Good afternoon. How is writing changing your notion of family or community?
oh, that's a great question. That requires some thought. Yeah, that's a really special question. I mean, I think it is inherently changing it. I think that in many ways, writing is a way for me to develop that relationship to other people. Why are there so many motorcycles? Because they all want to ride by city lights, I think. I don't know if this is quite an answer, but writing is so excruciatingly lonely. The idea of writing and the idea, like forming an image in my head of what I want to make, even if it's on the level of an image to a book, is the best part about it. Writing itself is so difficult. I'm only happy when it's over. Therefore, I always try to find a way to include other people into my writing. And some of that is just on the level of sharing things with people and developing those relationships just through the process of sharing. But a book like this, I invited a lot of people into it. And the excuse, I think, was to talk about and share this history. But the ulterior selfish motive was just to make myself less lonely. So thank you for making me less lonely. I mean, I think that community is an enormous part of why I write. I think that even back to the very beginning of writing, it was just a way to connect more fully with other people by understanding what I was thinking and feeling. And then I could like give more of myself to other people. Without writing, I'd probably be as antisocial and incapable of connecting with people as I was when I was young. And writing like gave me an opportunity to transform that. But that is a good question. That answer is not sufficient. I do want to think about that more. Thanks.
Gotcha.
Thank you. I had a quick question. While you were having the conversations with both survivors of not just in the historical context, the duality of the camps, but also maybe the similarities in how the individuals that were recounting their stories to you, did you find that there was any sort of sequence and semantics that maybe they both shared because of the experiences that they had? And did you find at all that that might have like correlated with the experience of how that specific part of the United States, air quotes, justice system treats specific individuals? Yeah.
I have a quick answer to that quick question. Well, I think your question was the answer to that question, right? I mean, I think exactly what you're saying is exactly what the answer to that question is, right? Could you say that phrase again? Sequence of semantics? Is that what you said?
Yeah, the sequence of semantics that kind of like cater to the my assumption based on what I just heard is that potentially both sides of each coin in terms of the category of individual that experiences these sequences of events, whether they be younger, you know, individuals versus older kind of gives a certain light as to how they feel their injustices were served. So did you find that while looking at both sides of the coin with like Ivan versus someone whom experienced it and got to see the historical changes and then the lack thereof at the same time within the justice system, did you see that there was a potential, like, not necessarily just a mirror versus like a way that people that have endured a specific amount of trauma at a specific time frame through a specific system that seems to have not necessarily changed the way that they like create or like showcase that aptitude towards people that are in those conditions? Like, was there something that maybe felt like the closest thing to a bridge that you drew?
I mean, I think that it could be a question for some of the people that have actually had developed relationships. I mean, does anybody want to answer these questions based on your experience?
I don't quite understand the question. Sorry. Do you want to restate the question?
Do I want to restate the question? Well, I think essentially what you're saying is these shared experiences across cross cultures, cross generations, and the kinds of forms of oppression that they are made to endure, how that maybe produces within those different groups of people a shared, certainly a shared experience. I mean, maybe not a shared experience, but correspondences and experience, and how that creates within those communities a way for them to communicate with each other. Is that partly what you're saying? So some of the people that are tucked in the corner over here have spent time, I mean, the people that I just mentioned have spent time with communities on the border, people in detention, and maybe the kinds of experiences that you've had, the conversations you've had with people who are of a much different generation, who are coming from Central America, for example. I mean, not to reduce that really complex question, but like what kind of relationship that becomes for you, things that you feel like you have in common, the things that might be different, but that you can still somehow talk to each other about?
Well, okay, I'll try. I think the moment at which I identified so profoundly with what was going on in the world is when the family separation started. I felt like, in many ways, I relived my own trauma, and felt like that I could look into that child's eyes and actually see myself in that place. So it was that really intense kind of identification, which pushed me to speak out in ways that I never dreamed that I would have the opportunity to, one, or that I would dare to even do. Seeing those children gave me the courage and the anger and the part of me that I had not really released or expressed until that moment.
Do you feel like you recognized something about your experience for the first time when you had these interactions?
Yeah, I think I grew up having been in the prison camps as a child, thinking that it would never happen again. That how could people imprison whole families, innocent children? But when that started to happen, and I feel really emotional now because I know it's happening now, today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. So when we met Ivan and Ilda, we immediately felt like family. Yeah, they had, this is the thing that was so amazing, is that when we were protesting and telling our story, when I talked to some of the women and children that were in the detention facility, they felt empathy for us. And one gathering, a mother who had just been released from the prison camp in Texas heard our story and she was crying. She said, I was held for 6 months, but when I hear that you were held for 4 years, I can barely stand the pain. And her tears were very healing for me. I never imagined anyone would cry for my family suffering.
I may be the oldest person in the room here. I don't know.
I know
Uh,
what's going on next.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. I guess I've seen a lot. And what I feel is that here, as a child of immigrants in the United States, that this is a very common experience for a lot of people who live here. And it's sort of like, you know, one always has in the back of their minds some kind of an identity confusion going on, you might say. And myself, I realized in the camps, you know, that, well, I'm not Japanese, I'm American. I remember feeling and thinking that very clearly while I was in the camp. But anyway, I've spent a lot of time studying the history of our incarceration now. So I guess really that question has never been really settled for me, my identity. And I think that when they talk about intergenerational trauma and things like that, at least for us, it was made very clear that to be Japanese was to be something that the United States has wanted to get rid of or kick out of the country and all. So it's always been a bit of a struggle about, you know, like, what is my place here? And identifying with other peoples, particularly peoples of color, and the whole identity thing that we have living here.
Is there a way? So I'm just looking at this row of people here. There's Koji and Carl and Casey, who are all descendants of incarceration. Koji's an archaeologist, Carl's a lawyer, Casey's a poet, among other things, all of whom do work about this history, among other things, or work related to this history. For the older generations, thinking about the descendant generations, what is your, I don't know, is there a way you can characterize your feeling about the work that we're all doing, or your hope for it, or not even the descendants, but the older generation?
Yes. Okay. Recently, a group of about 15 of us from Tsuru for Solidarity and the Wakasa Memorial Committee went to Alcatraz on the 55th anniversary of the occupation. And two of us on that trip, Reverend Ronald Kobata and I, were on a boat in 1970 to give support to the occupiers. I was a high school student. He was a Cal student. We didn't know each other. And many years later, through Tsuru for Solidarity, we met and discovered we had been on this supply boat that took water, clothes, food, and support to the Indians of all tribes. So at any rate, they asked us back and they said, we'd like you to be our guests at this 55th celebration and bring a Japanese American perspective in solidarity and as allies from 1970 to now. And it was very humbling because when you think of the genocide and the kind of very traumatic history that I can't not even imagine for, you know, as a third generation Japanese American whose grandparents came 150 years ago, not even. And then to be there with people who had for thousands of years had their land stolen, blood spilled, was quite an amazing honor. And in fact, descendants of Richard Oakes were there, his brother, his son, his grandson, and who was, he was one of the people who led that occupation. At any rate, it was just as Satsuki felt healing with people who cried for you, that people would say to us, your experience is important, your solidarity is important, your being here is important, kind of made us think, wow, I guess our history is important and we shouldn't just downplay it. And I think your writing, Brandon, has really made me think that our story is worth telling, and the power, the sensitivity you bring to it. I feel very connected, particularly to your prologue called Paper Flowers. And you write about a man who, James Hatsuaki Wakasa, who was shot by a guard in 1943, single, had no relatives, was cremated, his ashes unknown if his family in Japan ever learned about his murder. And I had researched it and for the Topaz Museum in Utah. And the first time I went there and just saw a sign put up by a local high school that said, Wakasa died here, I got out of the bus and my legs collapsed under me like jello. And this has never happened to me in my entire life. I was sobbing and I lost control of my body. I mean, I just collapsed. And so that told me there's some trauma that I don't even know I have in my body. So your writing is, I think, helping to heal me, and I won't speak for other people, but to be here with other people talking in conversation is very special, especially coming on the eve of what we know is happening tomorrow. Okay. And then at this Topaz concentration camp, which is in Utah, and 8,000 Japanese Americans were incarcerated there, including the relatives of many people in this room. There was this monument that Brandon writes about, made by immigrants, which is a 2,000-pound stone. But the next two memorials, one is on a 6-foot tall tree trunk, and another is a blue sign that was hand painted, were made by a Lakota Sioux indigenous person. And we just learned this. And he felt very connected to this death and to this person he'd never met. And so out of the 4 memorials there, 2 were made by a native person. And he said, when I was carving that tree trunk, the wind came up and I felt not sadness, but a sense of happiness that I could help remember this person. So I think that was another symbol of us all feeling a connection, even though we don't know each other, and these physical remnants exist. And thank you for interpreting them for us.
I've completely lost track of what your question was.
My question? I thought you had a question.
Oh, yes. Oh, all right. Yeah. So my question to you, when I was walking here, I actually almost without realizing it, walked right past the ICE field office on Sansome Street. And it started me thinking about how much of your book is about these, traumas that are sometimes literally buried, like the Wakasa Memorial, and, sort of just a lot like hidden in plain sight. And I'm curious about your thoughts about that, especially given, sort of thinking about place and history here, and like so many of the things that you write about that are in sort of the near present and during the roundup in World War II are like, they touch the Bay Area.
What is your question, Carl? I mean, no, I mean, it's the whole book, I think, is about what you're talking about. Yeah, I want to think about it with you. What should I?
Yeah.
We've never met before, by the
Oh,
way.
yes.
Nice
I know
to
we've
see you.
only
Yeah.
emailed. Yeah.
Carl's in the book.
Yeah.
I don't. Oh, is your mother in it?
I don't.
Barbara's your mother?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah. 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 It's a very small universe. um, yeah, I think for like it's like yes, yeah. I guess I am asking about like something that's like such a huge theme of the book, but it's
I'm going to refer to the book.
Yeah.
Because it is an amazing thing about writing is that my writing is so much more intelligent than I am. And it's not, I'm not, it's not like false humility or whatever. It's, I can only really think when I'm writing. But I wrote an essay about 801 Silver Avenue, which is the facility here in San Francisco, which is now a school. It's like a private school. And I went there. Yeah, I have this peculiar, but I think you all understand this interest or obsession with going to sites that have some historical meaning, but that there is now nothing there, or that it's been replaced by something that's very commonplace, like a school or a gas station or an archery range, right? Shopping center. I love going to those places and just standing there, and I don't know what it is that I'm connecting with. I don't know what it is that I'm absorbing. I just like being in those places. And I like seeing what's happening in those places now. So when I go to Tanforan, I like that there is a BJ's Roadhouse and that people are eating hamburgers and it looks fairly disgusting. And there's a really horrid statue of Seabiscuit and all of it. To me, there's something like deeply pleasurable about the kinds of band-aids that this country puts on top of wounds that are clearly not healed, and how monstrous and ridiculous the band-aids are. As a writer, I want to figure out exactly what the pleasure is in that for me, but also just as a person, I like going there. I like feeling absurd. I like standing in the middle of nowhere and wondering, what the hell am I doing? I do every chapter is just a retelling of that same situation over and over. So 801 Silver Avenue. Okay, so I'm just going to read something from that chapter. Let's see. I'll read this paragraph. Some of it is an answer to your question. Some of it's not, but it ends, I think, with like what I think about this. Whenever I'm getting close to these sites, I carry with me the delusion that everyone who is there, who I see and meet, is not only aware of the site and its history, but carries a piece of it with them if they are not a piece of it themselves. The delusion is based on a simple desire that we know where we are, which means knowing what happened there. The desire is based in turn on the feeling that I do not know where I am, which means that everyone who is there, even if they arrived only moments before, knows more than I do. I have met many people in the ruins of incarceration who did not know that is what happened there. And though I used to be surprised, I am increasingly confirmed in my understanding of the United States as an anti-memorial to everyone and everything it has disappeared and or destroyed, and of its citizens as the stewards of that disappearance and destruction. Maybe. I'd love to talk with you more, actually.
Yeah.
I didn't know you lived here. It's nice to see you.
Thank you so much. I saw your Zoom before, and it really struck me. I feel like all my life I've needed to get permission to speak. I don't know where it comes from. It's scary for me to even do this. But you holding this and holding the Zooms, and then Nancy doing the Berkeley Historical Society, and people start coming up to the podium, just like
once one person started going, then the next person and the next person. And I was around during the commission hearings across the country. So I was in LA and also here. And it was that same permission that the government said, you can speak now after 40 years. And one thing that I really felt, Sasuke, when you spoke, the tears, the audience, it was crying constantly. And I was crying, everyone was crying. It was just the fact that we had the permission to finally speak in these little organized, group panels or organized, but the fact that people connected so emotionally, and it was something that people held in for 40 years. And there were people that said that I have not spoken for 40 years. Anyway, that was something that I really felt that your book does. I was reading every comment that people were making, and it just struck me, just hit me. They could have been a couple words, but I was like, wow. So thank you so much. Mike, I had one question, which was just the title. How did you come to the title?
This was title number 51 of 51 options. Remember, that was the, I don't know if I sent you lists of titles, but it was the hardest thing. I remember I mentioned it to my mom and she was like, that's okay. We were in the car in Colorado and I said that title too. Titles are really hard. Then it occurred to me the double meaning of the afterlife is letting go. Because it has at least two meanings, maybe it has more meanings. And I don't know, I think it was something that just came to my mind after living with 50 other titles. Every time I would print it out, I'd put a new title at the top of it. None of them felt right. And then at some point I thought maybe it should have no title. I don't have a really good answer to that question. Explain the title itself. The two meanings, or yeah, so the afterlife is a process of letting go. Well, now I'm just going to make it seem really dumb, but that afterlife is the process of letting go, and the afterlife itself is letting go. The afterlife is, you know what I mean? The afterlife has that agency. I think part of it was that there is a way for me that writing is like an exorcism. There is something that I am not able to let go of. And whatever I'm writing about writing is the way that I can let go of it. And there is a part of me that wants to let go of this. I realize that's delusional because it, in a way, the thing that I'm holding on to has given me a life. It's giving me friends. It's giving me an understanding of so many things. Why would I want to let go of that? But maybe there's part of it that I want to let go of, and that I want to enter into the afterlife of my relationship to that thing. By the way, can you tell us what your name is and what?
Naomi Kubota Lee. Yeah.
Oh, you're in the book. You're in the book. Why didn't you say so? You're in the first chapter. Amazing. Nice to meet you. Are you related to this person? Yeah, we're wearing the same hat.
Yeah. So I think we have time for maybe one more question. Yeah, here we go.
I do, after Emiko, if Casey could come up and just talk a little bit about Tsuru.
Can you tell us a little bit about the cover, which I love?
Oh yeah, so Jeff Mellon is the designer. I don't know where he does it, the theories. Yeah. So this is a photograph that my grandfather made. I look at his photographs and I don't really say that he took it. I say he made it because it feels like a drawing. It's a photograph that my family has lived with forever. And the story is that this is a picture of his friend Yamato. But there's no record of this actual person, of him having a friend with this name. And I know Yamato has many meanings in Japanese culture, Japanese history. Every once in a while, I've thought it might actually be my grandfather, because there's something about his arm that looks familiar that I recognize, like right around there. But I don't know. I mean, nobody's verified it. But just picture my grandfather made in, I think, the 1930s. He was working as a photographer in 1941, and he was living in Pasadena, had a studio in Pasadena. And I just have always wanted to do something with this image. I've always wanted to put it on the cover of a book. So I did that. Most of what my previous City Lights book was a book about my grandfather. A lot of the stuff that I do is kind of in tribute to not just him and his memory, but the way to understand my relationship to that history. It's nice, right? I'm going to introduce, this is Casey Mukai from Tsuru for Solidarity.
Can we all first just please give Brandon a round of applause? Brandon, just thank you so much for the graciousness and care you have for our community stories. It's really special. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Casey Mukai. I use she, her pronouns. I am the granddaughter of Aiko and Shinichi, who they themselves and their families were incarcerated at Gila River and posted. And it's because of that injustice that I am standing before you today, why I'm involved in Tsuru for Solidarity. And I feel like all of Brandon's words today really get to the heart of Tsuru, of why Tsuru was started. And I just want to also just give credit to the founders and the key organizers that are here with us from Tsuru. And it's an honor to just be up in front of you here giving this. I also want to say that Tsuru for Solidarity works in solidarity with immigrant communities, and there have been many people and organizations far before us that have been a part of this work, and maybe some of you in the audience are as well. We know that Trump starts his office in this next week. But I also want to emphasize it's not just about Trump, right? The unjust system that is America has been here for a long time. And even though Trump is very scary and is going to cause a lot of violence and harm to a lot of communities, this fight will be ongoing. We know that he has already started raids here in California. There was a raid in Bakersfield. There's been raids at schools in Fresno. Really, really scary things. And so I want to frame this not as a call or a recruitment to get involved in Tsuru for Solidarity specifically, but rather a call to get involved in the movement for immigrant rights and justice overall. And we all have a part to play, whether it's being a poet or a writer like Brandon, whether it's showing up to protests, signing petitions, whether it's sharing your own story or your own connection to incarceration or similar injustices, we can all do our part. And so I have a page here that shares a little bit more about Tsuru, about where we work in child and family detention, Black reparations, and healing justice. But there's many other organizations out there doing this work, and I encourage you all to get involved. For Tsuru specifically, we have a new member orientation coming up on Tuesday, the 28th via Zoom. And if you're interested in that, please feel free to reach out. But again, thank you so much, Brandon, for this. And thank you all for being here.
And that about wraps it up. Brandon, thank you for this wonderful gift. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. And of course, to our sponsors. Be well, take care of each other, be strong, and we hope to see you all again soon.